alternative metal genre. So we're going to give you two steers, and Andy, we're going to get you to make the final judgment call on this about whether or not the alternative metal genre should be allowed to be used in future discussions. So I'm going to take this 2 points on this one, and we're going to get Mike, Richard, Nick, and G to all have your own viewpoints on this and share. But we're going to take two stances. Me and Kirk have a very different opinion about alternative metal. So, my steer on this is we've had this phrase alternative metal come up quite a lot of the time since whatever year it was in the early 90s. I'm guessing it was when it kind of started coming out. Kirk will get into a lot more detail, I'm sure, on this. But it's alternative metal is an alternative to what? Is what my first question kind of came to my head is when people get told about and they use that as a genre, that this band is alternative metal. That gives me no explanation about it. And in my head, it's just a cop-out where people can't be bothered to explain what this band actually sounds like. So we shouldn't be using it. And my guess is that it was used at a time when the amount of genres of metal, there weren't as many. If you're thinking early 90s, we hadn't got through new metal, we hadn't got really grunge had only recently just come out. We hadn't got deathcore, metalcore, mathcore. So there was a whole load of new genres have since come out, and crossover genres have now happened where people talk about funk metal and all sorts of other stuff that go into it. So in my opinion, alternative metal should not be allowed to be used anymore because it doesn't give me any description, doesn't allow me to explain what it's all about, and I think it should just be stopped being used to describe bands. Kirk, I'm going to let you take the opposite viewpoint and explain about alternative metal then.
Yeah, so I need to give the alternative viewpoint, don't I? So one accusation that I've heard leveled against alternative metal, and it probably does apply to me, is that it's an elitist term that allows Faith No More fans to describe their music without them being associated with new metal, which they went on to influence with the likes of Primus and Rage Against the Machine, even the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Helmet, bands like that. So I think it's important to define what I believe alternative music is. And if we look at the 1980s, I think there's two bullet points here. One, you might be on a major label, but you're certainly not writing bubblegum pop music for the radio, but your songs end up becoming hits. And two, I think it's important, most of these bands do have a grounding in punk, which, as we know, post-punk, industrial, and so many different subgenres, even new romantic comes from punk music. So alternative to me are bands like The Cure and Depeche Mode, and you could even say early U2. These were bands that were clearly writing music with choruses, and they were played on radio, but there was a lot of depth to them emotionally, even intellectually, and some of them were quite political. So even though they were the mainstream, they were certainly not using the industry way to do that, where you have a team of songwriters or you have a major label saying, you need to be writing hit singles. The mainstream came to them, didn't it? So alternative metal probably does start with Faith No More. But I want to skip forward to 2022 and 23. If it does exist, who are the bands? And I would have to say Spirit Box. If you think about it, this is a band that are clearly influenced by Björk and Portishead and Depeche Mode. And then clearly they're influenced by Meshuggah and Periphery and Tesseract and bands like that. So I do think alternative metal does exist. And it's not a new metal revival. They're not metalcore bands, even though obviously Courtney from Spirit Box is on record saying that Spirit Box are a metalcore band. I don't agree with her on that. And then we also have this other curveball, is that what the Americans say? Where we've got new metalcore, which again, I don't think Code Orange is a new metal band. So before I hand it over, I am aware of why we have to use this retrospectively now, because if you're a fan of Faith No More, you do not want that band to be associated with new metal and all these bands that they influence, because they hate it. And also, I do think it does exist. Dave doesn't. I don't think it's a cop-out. Time for me to hand over to the rest of you guys to have your say.
I'm going to throw it to Nick and G to have your viewpoints on this. What do you believe in it?
You can go first, G.
I'll say something. So my question would be, how many subgenres do you want? Because I don't know if you're familiar with No Such Thing as a Fish, which is the QI spin-off podcast where they give... now, they did a special on heavy metal, and they claimed that heavy metal has the most amount of subgenres of any wider genre. So they listed loads and loads off, and so what point? Like you could take, say, White Zombie, you could call them B-movie metal, and then you could take Primus and call it slap-based metal. Are you just getting into the point where there's just ridiculous amounts of subgenres where it's just getting ridiculous? What alternate metal can do, though, it can allow you to change your sound. If you're in a band that considers yourself alt metal, and you've got one album that is like White Zombie, is 50s B-movies samples, but then the next album, like you mentioned Faith No More, a lot of their albums are quite different to the last. So if you were to say they were a funk band at first, that's not what they were later on. So alt metal gives that them breathing space to be more creative and come up with different sounds, different ideas. And I personally don't have a problem with the alt is never kept me awake at night. It might do now.
Yeah, I think that's it now. You're going to be sitting there pondering, but is it alt metal?
So I have no issues with it.
Are you alt metal?
I might be alt metal.
Right, okay, I knew it.
So carry on with the alt metal, that's fine. Why not?
Okay. What do you reckon, Nick?
Oh, yeah. I mean, all the subgenres and stuff, I know it's a thing. I know everyone's obsessed with pigeonholing stuff, but yeah, I don't know. I with alt metal, I don't know. I don't think I care enough. Because I just listen to something and go, that's good, that sounds a bit metally, that does. The end. And I think I kind of respect bands that kind of go outside the box. I suppose it's the alternative version of metal, but there's so many alternative versions of metal. It's like, where does it go? There's so many pigeonholes, it's like we run out of pigeons.
Can I just add that when I'm talking to someone and they're describing their bands and they're like, we're a bit funk, but we've got some doom, and then we're death, and I get a bit bored halfway through their listing their various influences, and I was like, just call yourself alt metal.
Well, yeah, there's that. Think about it, a lot of the bands.
That's a really good point, actually. Yeah.
A lot of the bands from the 90s, for example, or in the 80s, were doing stuff that weren't put in a pigeonhole. They just played music that was heavy. And then everyone's ended up having to pigeonhole them. I must come up with where does this fit? Why do you have to do that? Just enjoy it. It's a bit of a hippie answer from me, but I kind of mean it. I think when I was younger, I used to kind of obsess over this. I think, where does it fit? I think now I'm just like, it's cool. Yeah, go for it.
Personally, love bands that don't sit in a pigeonhole. The more different they sound, the more interested I am.
Yeah. I just want to enjoy it. Like, for example, there's one band I'm really into at the moment. Do you know Moontooth?
What are they called?
Moontooth.
I've heard the name.
Right. So their new album, Phototroph, is very difficult to pigeonhole. Funny enough, it kind of spans. It's like heavy rock with a bit of metal on top. Could be alt metal. Oh, check it out. But I tell you what, stop putting the whiskey near me. Just it's such a blinding, refreshing album. I can't put it in a pigeonhole, which I thoroughly enjoy. And I don't want someone to come along and put it in that pigeonhole. I'm quite happy with it floating around the pigeonhole.
What they called it? Moontooth, did you say?
Yeah, Moontooth, and the album is Phototroph. They've got a few albums, but this new album, honestly, it's everything from. It's got like put the whiskey on. It's it's the sun is beaming through.
It's Nick's halo.
It's a sideways halo. It comes from my ear. I can't put it anywhere. It kind of spans from like Mastodon mixed with Faith No More, mixed with almost like pop in places. I don't know. It's all over the place, but it is fantastic and very refreshing to listen to. And I think they just labelled themselves as either alt rock or something. I don't know. I haven't really looked into it because I like it. I'm going to have to sort this sun out, mate.
Sort the sun out. Okay, Mike, what's your thoughts on this?
I mean, I very much resonate with what the guys were saying. That was pretty much bang on what I was going to talk about already. It's the whole, subgenres, categories, having to put bands into their little box, and especially with modern heavy music, there's so many different sounds happening. As Kirk was talking about with Spirit Box and all these modern metal bands, it's like, at what point, I wouldn't be mad if someone said, okay, this is Spirit Box, they're an alternative metal band, and I went to see them. I go, okay, that's an okay description for them. I'm not angry at it. But I also wouldn't be surprised if somebody then said, you know, Spirit Box, they're a gent band. I'd be like, yeah, I can hear that. And even if someone said they're a metalcore band, I go, well, for me, I definitely wouldn't describe them that way. But if that's how they're describing themselves, especially, then, you know, especially if the band or the artist is saying, okay, we're this, there is some level of like, okay, I respect what you're describing yourself as well. So, but yeah, I'm definitely not on your level, Dave, where if I hear the term alt metal, that I'm going crazy. Like, it doesn't really bother me that much. So, genuinely, but
Okay, fair enough. Richard?
But you're fully entitled to feel that way about it as well. So it's.
To be honest, I quite enjoy like all the sort of subgenres and figuring out which bands kind of. I liken it to sort of thinking about like movie genres. Like I like knowing what I'm getting into. So like, you know, if I want to go see a movie, I like knowing that it's going to be like a comedy or a horror or something. And I'm like the same with bands. Like if I go to a lineup, I like knowing you know, kind of what I'm getting myself into, like sort of what to expect almost. Obviously you can get like really nitpicky with it and get into like subgenres, but like overall I like sort of vaguely knowing where I'm headed, because like I you know, personally, I don't know about you guys, but there are like quite specific subgenres that I like really like, and then the sort of vaguely related genre like I might not like so much. And so, you know, if I'm going to like one or the other, I kind of like to know generally sort of like which way it's heading, unless, you know, I go and see a band and they sound good, which happens all the time, and then I don't really care what genre they are.
Right.
So,
You notice that in this day and age, which I think is a fantastic time to be alive in music, is that there's so many bands that cross so many subgenres, and it's and it's so many subgenres. You just eventually just have to go. It is metal.
Yeah, that's the thing. When you just start calling a metal band, and then it's
I
like,
think it's going full circle a bit. And I've just looked at Moontooth, and they just call themselves rock.
yeah.
do you think?
What a crazy term.
The widest umbrella you could ever get.
It's a massive umbrella. It's like,
Do you think the Metal Archives website has the final say on what genre they are, because they always put a genre on?
Someone in there.
If you're a deathcore band, you do not end up on it. Medium Metallic.
Yeah,
Or
I think
metalcore, you're not allowed on there.
Yeah.
No.
there's someone in a shed, like locked away in a shed. He makes these decisions.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking, because I was at a death metal show the other day at New Cross Inn, and it was literally a whole day of death metal bands,
Really?
like old school death metal bands, and I was like, I knew what I was getting into, really, and you know, like all the bands are going to sound really similar, and I was really happy with that. Really enjoyed it. And there weren't any like, you know, deathcore bands there or anything, for example, but not that I would have minded, but you know.
No, I know what you mean, because it's like to someone listening from the outside, it all sounds like metal.
Yeah.
But we you know, once you're involved in it, you kind of go, well, actually, that sounds a bit like, you say, metalcore-y, or that death metal band's got that lot of black metal influence there, or whatever it may be. But yeah, like you say, you go to these kind of events at the New Cross, and you just what it does, what it says on the tin.
Yeah.
Just maximum blast beats and people being really angry.
On that, I get really irritated when people misdiagnose a metal band. When Napalm Death were on, I'm going back away. Was it TFI Friday? Chris Evans, and he introduced them as a thrash metal band, and I was like, no.
Yeah.
Well, it's like Pantera with the original videos, and they're talking about them being magazines and they're called thrash metal. I'm like, no, we're groove metal.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. And even back then, they'll go, no, we're not thrash, we're not Slayer. You know, we are this. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember.
It's definitely an issue when it's completely kind of interpreted as something else. But if it's like kind of loosely, you could hear what it might be. Then it's like, okay, I can kind of. I'm not too.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I wouldn't be too sort of mad if it was like, you know, just a loose kind of connection there. But when it's complete opposite, it's like, nah, it's not that.
Anyone outside the metal community doesn't really give a fuck.
Well, to be honest, outside the metal community, there's one term that should be banned, which is screamo.
Nice.
Someone says you're in a screamo band.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not even a thing, dude.
Yeah.
No, like honestly, it makes my whenever I hear someone say it.
Yeah, it makes me scream.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's like that, you know, that up and coming band Metallica, is it called?
Never heard of them.
No. I think they're death metal or something. I can't remember what it is.
Yeah.
Okay, we should throw this to Andy. Andy, you've heard everyone's viewpoint on the alternative metal genre description. So, what do you reckon about the whole thing? Should we get rid of it, keep it?
It's a really interesting discussion, isn't it? After yours and Kirk's sort of summary of the sort of both sides of the argument, I was siding towards you, Dave, where it is a cop-out. There are enough genres where you can pigeonhole, as people have mentioned, a particular band. But then I was listening interestedly to what G said about how many subgenres do you get. I mean, was it Prong you described as sort of slap-based metal? You know, that is almost unique to them. So it doesn't really help other bands sort of fall into that category. But also like the idea that if you do call yourself alternative, you've got that scope and availability to make different types of music on subsequent albums. You're not stuck in the same sort of genre. So I think there are enough enough terms where you can actually sort of combine two or three, give somebody who may be interested in what you're talking about an idea of what this particular band sounds like. But I don't like the term alternative metal. I think if it's difficult to do that particular sort of summary of somebody, just call them metal and let the listeners sort of make up their own minds. I think alternative kind of is a little bit elitist, but if you're definitely not thrash, you're definitely not black, you're definitely not doom, and you're not a combination of some of those subgenres, metal is a perfect description. And then if somebody listens to them and thinks,
I agree with that.
If this is a term we use for Faith No More, then, and we're not using alternative metal, I guess we're just going to have to call them avant-garde metal, which nobody called them at the time.
I mean, I would
No, we're banning avant-garde metal as well. No, that's going.
I was going back in the day. That used to describe a lot of albums. You guys may or may not remember this, but you used to get sort of mailing lists and catalogs sent out monthly from various sort of album distributors, and you go through it, and there'd be the black metal section, and then underneath there'd be avant-garde black metal. And to me, that just sounded as if it's black metal, but a little bit weird, a little bit sort of out there.
It's super arty. It's
A little
basically
bit sort of unstructured and maybe just sort of trying to do something a little bit sort of arty,
that's
rather
it.
than being true to that genre. So I don't like avant-garde either. So metal or one of the genres or a combination of genres and subgenres to give an accurate or a reasonably accurate description of whatever band sounds like or whatever album it is you're reviewing. But it
Fair
is
enough. I mean, I think there are also multiple other genres you could talk about this in the similar sort of concept about whether they should be allowed. Because if you were to talk about like doom, when I sort of get like the new album releases and we're going through it and it comes up, it's doom metal, I know exactly what that's pretty much going to sound like. When it says it's a thrash metal band, it's a thrash metal, you know what you're going to get with that. If it's groove metal, black metal, you can pretty much just by that genre description know. And if they sort of say groove black metal, you kind of get a vague idea of what that's going. But when they say avant-garde metal or alternative metal, you're like, that could be anything. I have absolutely no idea.
I think it's less appealing in a way as well when you hear that. It's like
You've got to have these genres or subgenres put out there because it's part of the marketing, as you say. So if you're marketing yourself as a thrash band, fine. But what I'm saying is, how far does it go? That's all. And I think there should be at least 5,000 more subgenres by next week.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I tend to think of I tend to associate alternative metal with new metal. Really, those types of bands. That's kind of where I would pigeonhole.
What alternative is like new?
The 90s kid in me is going to kick off.
There's
There's a bit of a resurgence as well in like modern metal with like new metal tendencies, I think, with like a lot of the popular modern metal bands. So yeah, that's.
I've discovered Gore Pig recently, and they're kind of, as they sound, they're very kind of gore grind, but they have elements of new metal, which actually I will say kind of works quite well in their favour. I've really been digging that. That's my
Your top tip for the day.